I'm a boomer. I'm a boomer. I'm a boomer. I'm a boomer. Jesus Christ. Oh wow. I was I was talking the whole time like for 10 minutes, bro. Are you self-taught or not? And bro, I can't. Bro, I can't. Holy shit. I don't wanna know what he says anything. And I thought I was just boring. Yeah, maybe I should apply for maybe should get a voice change and apply for what is it name Face Connect. Cause I sure as hell ain't gonna go to Hololive. Yeah, speaking with the man on the wall, man. Now you gotta do a 24-hour stream. You know what? I gotta put that in the drafts. Anyway, I've been sketching also before I've been informed that the stream's not running. A little bit of a doodaddles here. Anyway, like, one of the questions was one of the questions was you want like do I have any like exercises? And I do actually have two that are like one is fairly orthodox, the other isn't. Thanks, man. I've been doing a lot of sketching lately. Been doing a lot of that. So, like the two exercises. Then we're gonna show you a couple of other sketches. The first exercise to is what I've been doing. Basically, it's sketching, and perhaps more to the point, it's doodling. And the reason why you want to do this is because it's a very good way of getting into the habit of drawing regularly and loosely, especially when you are working for clients or you're working on some kind of big project. It's very easy to feel pressured into having to work, or it feels like you kind of have to force yourself, maybe. You're gonna have those days where it just feels like it's not quite working, it's not quite coming out, like constipation. And so you want to build the habit of drawing regularly, even if on that day it's like one of those days and all you can do is an X. You want to exercise being able to just draw for its own sake. So you don't really get into this situation where you need to, where you feel like you need to force yourself into work. and is just something you do instead. It kind of goes hand in hand with another piece of advice I've recently heard from Pirate Software. Pretty good streamer, by the way. I highly recommend him. And it's that when you're feeling down about a project or a painting, or say you are in game development and things are just not working out, you don't want to end when you're feeling bad, because this kind of creates an association bad, between feeling bad when you are working on your creative projects and feeling good when you quit. So you kind of want to do something before you call it quits. And that something can be anything for any reason. And when you're done with it, or after you've kind of beaten that rut, this bad feeling, then you kind of cut it out, but not before that. And one way of kind of getting over this is by doodling. Again, like no hearts, no expectations, no no great uh like no great ambitions going in, just kind of allowing yourself and your ideas to come out completely unfiltered and take themselves to your canvas. Like this one, you kind of started as a doodle and now it kind of ends up looking like some weird knight. That wasn't wanted, by the way. Just what came out. So yeah, this is definitely an exercise to look into. Just kind of relearning or internalizing to draw for your own sake, and put something, just to put something on a piece of paper or anything really. The second piece of advice, uh, you know how Gen AI works, right? Yeah, I'll have to invoke the abominable intelligence for a second, because what they do is, like have this massive batch of other people's work and they punt it into a neural network to make all kind of weird connections, blah blah blah, what, and from there comes another image or something that kind of emulates the look of that, an approximate solution, as researchers actually like to call it. Um, this is my second piece of advice: do the fucking same. And by that I mean do master studies. You you pick the work of a really, really good artist, someone that you admire, someone whose work kind of clicks with you. At first, it should absolutely be someone whose work you love. So, say you're a big fan of, let's just say, Honkai Star Rail or something, and you like the character designs or you like the splash art or whatever. Doesn't really matter. And you just want to kind of emulate the look of the illustrations. Then find the artist, find like a couple of works from him, and see to emulate that. See to figure out like why they draw the things that they draw. So a master study, you can kind of imagine like an artistic autopsy. Uh, let's just say that's a frog. Um, so think of it like an artistic autopsy, where you are trying to take out all of the individual components of a painting. Like, how does he do lighting? How does he like stylize proportions? How does he do line art? How do all of these things kind of interact with one another? And so on. Like, what kind of colors do they use? How do they use the colors? How and why do they play together with each other? How do they compose their paintings? This sort of thing. And just try to recreate that. Because doing that is going to teach you like how art works. Uh, I'm putting that in quotation marks here because one of the other rules is that if it looks right, it is right. But if you're starting out, there's going to be a lot of things that you don't know yet at all. But even if you're a pro, you can learn a lot from others with the way how they draw backgrounds, for example, or with the way how they compose their paintings. Just, excuse me, I'm having a coffee here. And by doing master studies, you are deconstructing these paintings and try to understand how they work so that you can apply that knowledge to your own projects. Master studies, by the way, you can also kind of sort of do them for other disciplines. Say, for example, you want to develop a horror game. Okay? Says you want something you want to do. Then you might want to look at other horror games, or perhaps just one horror game series, like let's say, uh, let's say not mascot horror, let's say Dead Space. That's absolutely a necromorph. Must be the wrong stream, but I don't think Pipkin Pippa is streaming yet. Hey, hey, thanks for coming. We had half an hour boomer moment here because I was streaming while the stream was actually offline. And so people started to wonder what's going on. So yeah, like let's say you wanted to like learn more about horror games and how to make your own, and you say I'm gonna take lessons from Dead Space. Okay, so how's the level design? Like what makes it work? Like what are the monster designs and why do they work? What's the storytelling? And that's kind of how you can deconstruct video games themselves in like an analytical fashion. And and then use that knowledge to make your own game better. So these will be the two exercises I recommend. First is doodles, and the second is master studies. And I'm highlighting them especially because things like gesture drawings, like practicing perspective, ta ta ta, or using references. This is like the kind of advice everybody gives. You know, like you're gonna ask an artist or the average artist, hey, like what kind of exercise should I do? Figure studies, perspective drawing, Yeah, figure studies, perspective drawing, color studies, maybe anatomy, obviously. That's always the big one, anatomy. Gotta know how to draw a hand, so everybody's gonna accuse you of using Midjourney. But these two are rarely taught about. Is doodles. So to uh, to never really get into this rut of kind of always maintaining this joy of creation, you could say. So it's not just work, 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 work all the time. It's not just about results all the time. This is a really bad mental training. It's a bad attitude to have in the long run. It's a recipe for burnout. And the second is master studies. Because you can do all of the studies you want. You kind of want to look into how people that have already learned how to draw and paint things well, how they are doing it. And take that knowledge or parts of that knowledge and apply it to yourself. Actually, I have a better idea. Now it's a separate layout. Yeah, Nihei is he his name is written all over my work. Maybe not that much, but it's there, definitely. I've mentioned it some other times. He was somehow part of my DNA before I even knew his name. Because I've found a lot of other people's work that was inspired by Nihei, and I looked at it and I was like, yo, this is the tightest shit. And from there, one thing led to another. Eventually, I came across Nihei proper, and then it clicked, and it was like, oh, that's where it comes from. That makes perfect sense. Why didn't it click sooner? I have no idea. I I can't show a picture. I'd have to take a photo. But I have the entire Masters Edition collection from Manga Cult 1 to 6. I have volumes 1 to 7 of Knights of Sidonia and the luxury edition of Biomega in my shelf. And the obvious one that's missing is Abara, but it's fairly hard to get by, and I would have to see about money in the next couple months. Maybe I order it, maybe I don't. When it's available, if it's available. A Biomega slaps. Knights is very different from his other stuff, or rather the stuff leading up to it. It was kind of the, I'd say it was like the changing point where classic Nihei ended and current Nihei began. But it was still in this spot where it was, where that old Nihei still had a lot of influence, especially with the very strong black and white contrasts. It's not for everybody, clearly, but personally, I like it actually. Biomega is Biomega is crazy. On the one hand, the story is Like it's a mess, but it's a mess in a good way. I, I'm sometimes debating with myself which one is less penetrable. Is it Blum or is it Biomega? Because with Blum, I at least understood the story to a degree. With Biomega, I am still scratching my head. Something, bioweapon, virus, interaction, space noodle, something. What I find interesting about Biomega, however, is when you read it from beginning to end, you can see the artistic evolution of Nihei. Like it starts with the classical rough textured, sketchy lines that you would expect from Blam and Abara. And then it moves more and more and more towards Knights of Sidonia's more sleek, more clean style. Kind of crazy. I think you should. I had a good time with Biomega. Absolutely. I think you can get a pretty good idea by opening like the first couple pages of Biomega and then just jumping straight to the end. And yeah, it's a funny thing I noticed when I've been rereading it. I think the second or third time. Yeah, mostly sketches, concepts. somewhat interchangeably. Maltese Ghost. Let me check it out briefly. Ah, yeah, yeah. Now I remember. The guy that met off. Crazy. I felt like I knew the name, but I will confess at first I thought you were talking about the guy who made Priest. Mortis. Uh, what's crazy is that he elected it to make it look like an Atari 2400 game. That is crazy. Yeah, and it's really on point too. Like a game that looks like that has no business being that scary. I have to say dogs by default. I'm allergic against cats. I would not damn a dog for the sad fate of being my pet. Oh God, thou art in heaven, don't tempt me to roast this guy into the next galaxy. Some of these sketches I'm trying today are also for all manner of different creatures for Keka. And for example, this kind of cyborg fairy looking ass motherfucker, is intended as a kind of assistant to the wardens, those protector type cyborgs in that world. And so Mara is gonna have one as well. And these in particular, that like these little fellas, they're thought up to be made out of Silver Skull, but pretty. uh, you'd be surprised how apt that comparison is because these are the fellas that don't make the cut. So say you have like somebody that goes through the whole sort of whole raising process of becoming a warden, this faulty process of backwards engineered arcane technology that works every now and then, but not always. And every now and then you end not every now and then. A lot of times you kind of end up with uh, you end up with aspirants is the wrong term. You end up with converted that don't quite make it. Like something with the development goes wrong for some reason, and they have to be discarded. But among those, every now and then you also have those that are faulty. They don't quite develop right, but they don't develop so wrongly that they are useless. And so they're given the chance of becoming one of those little fellas to become an uh, not a deleted, an agitator, an adjutant to a warden. And the one for Mara is particularly important for reasons I don't want to talk about yet. Don't want to spoil the surprise. But they're not alone. It was one of the weirder things that started to come into the world of the Hollow Strata as I was writing it and rewriting it and rebuilding it over the years is that eventually I arrived at this idea that that whole technological, well, now ruined technological society, that's clearly a city, and city means civilization. The idea is that it's not run on science because science has been forgotten. It's not run on knowledge because knowledge has been lost. And so, what is the oldest science in history? What did humans use to understand the environment and try to comprehend their place in that environment before there was science and gathered knowledge throughout many ages? What was there? Faith. Faith was there. And so this whole world is not running on science. It's running on technological worship, or as it's generally referred to within the setting, it's referred to as technomancy. So you don't have coders. Apocalypse is my theme, dude. It's actually so far after the apocalypse that it's not really relevant anymore. Though I guess you could say that for some remote tribes in South America, wherever or not the apocalypse was 1,000 years ago really doesn't matter. But yeah, like in that setting, this happened so long ago, it's no longer a subject. But all that knowledge of the old world was lost. All that technology is so that was left behind is so far advanced they just don't understand it. It's basically magic to them. And so something like this, like imagine like coding knowledge or in some interface systems that we used to use those machines. It's like seen like divine language. Machines that can run autonomously are like interpreted as god machines of some description. Knowledge of the old world and how things were run is considered both uh, of divine origin but also extremely dangerous. And it's dangerous because the technological level of that society was so high. They basically perfected reality. Like they were on a level where they could say things and those things would become like tangible because they mastered the language of the universe itself. Like we're talking on that level. And there's a reason why things went kaput, why there was that reset, as you say, why all of that has been gone and forgotten, and why the architects that used to build this world, the hollow strata, as they're now known as, are no longer there. And it's a reason and an aftershock of the decision that carries itself through not just the story of Kerker, but the entire setting. Like those little fellas here, for example, like they exist as the result of backwards engineered knowledge from those ancient people. But it's also so far in the past and has been done in these instruments have been used in a backwards engineering kind of way for so long that it's just largely considered normal. Like you have people be like you have like for example civilizations that are born entirely out of cloning parts. You have civilizations that have been wholly mute, or you have people or beasts that came as a result of mutations caused purely by somebody perceiving like divine knowledge in quotation marks. And when you're confronted with what's basically truth itself, it starts to change your entire being. Like say for example, you get uh, you get like a commandment of sorts that says consume. Like it's just the word consume. That would send you into a mindless feeding frenzy. And it would alter every part of your physiology to accommodate that feeding frenzy. And that every time where you try to convey that message to someone else onward, they would get that very same corrupted idea coming back to you. Like think of it almost like a mimetic virus of sort, a cancerous idea. It's a large part because of these kind of threats that wardens exist in the first place. Because say you have like some poor bloke, right? And he picks up the Necronomicon, basically the Necronomicon. That guy goes crazy. And he's gonna act on that forbidden knowledge now, wholly, entirely, because his entire mind and body has been consumed by it. And to answer that problem, there are those warden fellas, like here, that's definitely Mara with her cool sword, and the little fly fucker. These guys get sent out to take care of those guys that got crazy. And say one of them goes so crazy that he levels up, it becomes a really big fucker. Like in this case, he just upgrades straight to Cthulhu, right? And he's been left alone so long that that the idea consumed him to become a great old one. In this example, then they are sent out to kind of keep it contained, to keep the damage contained, because these guys are nearly unkillable. Like even to wardens, it would require hundreds of them, because it would basically mean killing an idea. So what's done instead, like they move in and on what's basically a supernatural welfare check, and they go, okay, have they spread out a bit too far? Are they behaving? Is everything fine here? And if yes, then they're good to go. The general idea is trying to prevent this to happen in the first place, but sometimes it's just not possible. And one of those big guys can start the cycle anew with a whole bunch of underlings. And that's generally what wardens try to prevent, or it's one of the things that they try to prevent. Wait, let me take it back. But let's say something happens. Say one of the wardens comes around and they actually mark that big guy. Or something else happens that does him in. Like maybe another great one comes along and makes a territorial claim or something like that. Or maybe an accident. Or maybe their message is so self-destructive that eventually things just kind of take their course. Well, what are the little ones then? What are those guys? Because the deity they serve, the dogma that they that they were indoctrinated into, is now gone. Like like it was never there. All this is no longer relevant. So what happens with the little guy? Well, he now becomes a stray, and those that were later indoctrinated, they can't really grow themselves because it was never their message to begin with. They didn't really own it, they were owned by the idea itself. And so a whole lot of these little fuckers actually create the ecosystem of that world. They kind of take up ecological niches of some description. Like think of some entity whose purpose it was to hoard, and so it devolved into a being of greed. And eventually, say that beast was was crushed under the sheer weight of its hoard, and all the servant beings that it converted were now suddenly free. Well, they'll probably still start a horde. They would still follow that idea to some extent. The entire body has been altered to do so. But on top of that, they are now more or less free to do as they please. And so, like maybe now they become like small thieving creatures that break into your home and steal your socks. Or maybe they hide in dark alleyway corners and try to sell parts of their hoard for other stuff that they may be interested in for some unknowable reason. Like almost like a weird fairy tale creature. Though more like the scary fairy tale kind of stuff. You know, the ones that steal your baby and climb into their crib to pretend it's your child? That kind of stuff. Like the Scottish and Irish and Slavic fairy tales. Space kobolds. But yeah, I guess you get the idea. There's one thing I want for the comic is for the world to feel lively. It might be my one. It might be the one thing I quite didn't like about Blum. I get that it was the point. I get it makes sense in the setting, but the place was extremely desolate. You know, like in the uncountable millions of years that the city existed, it never really seemed to develop a new ecosystem for itself. And that's like one of the things I don't want. Again, for the setting, it makes perfect sense. For the story, it makes perfect sense. How can you develop an ecosystem when the entire city itself is foundationally built to be hostile to all forms of life? It's not a point of criticism, it's a more personal distaste, I guess I would say. I don't know if it translates well over stream, but my performance is actually quite dog ass. My inputs are very heavily delayed on my end. I'll have to see to improve that for the next time, like maybe lower the bitrate or something. The bitrate's probably gonna be the big thing. Yo, take care. Thanks for coming, mate. Kira is crazy. Isn't much I can say about it that hasn't already been said by everyone else about Akira. I do love. Yeah, yeah, right. It's not just old. It is one of those classics. It's overhyped. Yes, yes, yes. Like, it's really good. It's a classic for a reason. But some people go a bit far in saying how good it is. Like, even in that era of anime, I'd say things like Jinro are way better and very much underappreciated. Like, sure, you're gonna have people always say, "Oh, Jinro was so good." Yeah, right. But when you're gonna ask somebody about a classic, like classic late, when was it? Late 80s, early 90s anime? It's usually either going to be Ghost in the Shell or Akira. Funny that overhyped, something being overhyped was one of the reasons why it took me quite a while to get into Jujutsu Kaisen. I wouldn't say it was bad, but with how much it has been gassed up to me, it like the expectations were just way inflated at that point. It's not bad, but it's also not as good as some other people like to say. Fandom in particular goes crazy about it, and good on them. But it's not as crazy as you would think with the amount of hype that it gets. I haven't checked EPO, not yet. Uh, I mean, obviously, I'm a 7'5" goddamn flesh mountain with a mask on. Duh. Seriously, it's like the PFP I've been using forever. Um, I'm not sure if I would call it a mascot. I guess you could say he technically is for how long I've been using him, but at the same time, I never used him to represent anything outside of kinda sorta myself. I know, perhaps not the most satisfactory answer. I guess I should get around to making a mascot proper at some point. I have a couple characters that I do draw semi-regularly. I'm also not sure if just a if a robot wouldn't be like a more fitting mascot. For a while, I've been drawing a lot of robots. If you want to be like that, you could say I still do. But it's also not really like my main thing. You know what? I'm going to sit on that one for a while. Ah, too late. You got me onto the pondering. Next month, you're going to see a mascot pop up, and it's going to be a gynoid with massive tits. And it's going to be your fault. I refuse to think of the Chuck E. Cheese rat within this context. I sometimes consider myself lucky that I did not have to deal with nightmare diesel automatons as childhood mascots. That seems to be mostly in America. It probably existed in Germany in some form as well, but my parents never took me there and I never heard that it did exist. So I will just assume that it barely did exist here. I'm counting my blessings. It's a bit rough, but it also kind of has to be. The idea is that this thing is covered head to toe in this long, strainy, dark fur. Like its silhouette would almost look like just a weird shadow thing sliding across the ground. It's intended to be one of the nastier creatures in the setting. One that one might not necessarily see within the first or even second story, but at some point, probably. Or maybe in the game that I'm working on. It's a side thing that's taking place in the same universe. Like, remember what I told you about those kind of creatures that had happened when one of those old ones, again quotation marks, dies, and they're set loose. Like this is one of the worst ones. One of the worst ones that you could run into if you're just a regular guy. Yeah, I'm working on a game. This is more of a side thing, very much a hobby to learn a little bit about game design. I'm working on a 2D top-down RPG in RPG Maker MZ. There's some updates about that on my Patreon. Most of what I'm doing right now is graphical work because all of the foundational systems work, like the like navigation works, menu systems work. Uh, yeah, that was like XP, like the old one. But it's good. It's absolutely good. Like some bangers were made in that. I got MZ in particular because I went in saying I want the push turn battle system. I want, like, if I'm going to make an RPG, I want it to be tactical. I want you as a player to have as much control as possible to make strategic decisions and make it a game where you are also incentivized to do so. I thought something like that, a push turn battle system is just optimal. Like one of the games that I've played a couple months ago was Fear and Hunger, like everybody else. And there I liked how you had to be extremely considerate about reading your enemy and knowing where to attack, what to attack, how to do so, and when to guard yourself rather than going to an offensive, and so many more things. Like that was the part about the game that fascinated me the most. Like the setting was okay, cool. Like the first one was almost ripped one for one from Berserk, but that is a whole different story, and it's fair enough. It's fair enough. I'm not gonna bitch about that. Terminal was great. Terminal was great. Uh, Especially like in terms of originality, he like Orange really upped the ante there. But the thing that got to me was the combat system. Is that you genuinely only tend to fight a single enemy, and that enemy has a whole lot of different body parts, and your success in the game is dependent on reading your enemy correctly, rather than just kind of brute forcing yourself through it. And that's something that I want in my RPG as well, though in a different way. Hynix is a game that I only ever seen but never played. But everything that I have seen about it is a trip. If you make a turn-based combat, I beg you don't make an encounter that lasts 30 turns or at least allow mid-combat save. I gotta tell you what I do. Has any one of you ever played Shin Megami Tensei? Like in particular Nocturne. Okay, so in Shin Megami Tensei, we're gonna we're gonna take a small tangent here. In Shin Megami Tensei, there is an infamous enemy. Uh, he goes like in a coffin and everything. Like, I don't remember his name all too clearly right now. I think it was Mog, and he had a skill called Beast's Eye. And what Beast's Eye do is it has a very mean effect on the way the game works, because in a push turn battle system, you would have every turn would have a number of turns. And so, say the enemy, say you have 3 turns a turn, and your opponent has 3 turns a turn. These dragons represent turns. Let me. Oh no, it works fine. So you have you have an X amount of turns per turn, and that means you can take one action per turn. Sometimes two actions. There are certain modifiers in place, but that's the general gist of it. Beast's Eye consumes a turn to then give you two additional turns. And there's also the variant that calls Dragon's Eye, which gives you three additional turns. They can spam that. That particular marker guy, this coffin fella, they can spam that. That's in the game. It's already installed. It's already fully functional. I already have a test enemy that can do that. Suffer. And no, you don't get to do that yourself. I put a skill into the game that allows an enemy to give themselves more turns per turn. I created a genie that allows you to wish for additional wishes, and I gave it to the enemy. Now, there are ways to beat it. I'm not insane. Like, for example, you lose turns if an attack gets deflected or dodged, or if it hits an elemental resistance. So, on that basis alone, you could technically beat Beast Eye Spam. But I've also added a failsafe because everything else would be unfair. Well, several failsafes actually. First of all, I intend to make every enemy that has it. I want to give them a consistent design so that you as the player will know exactly when you run into one of those guys. So the first one you're gonna see with like a particular something, and they use beast eye in quotation marks. And now you know, okay, like this enemy has that. And then you're gonna run into another enemy later on that has that very same notable design element. And so you will be led to assume, okay, maybe they have that. So I should act accordingly. Because SMT3, you just straight up have no idea whether or not they have that. You have to assume, okay, I have one enemy, so they may or may not have that. A second failsafe is that with every time an enemy uses that, they also roll a dice, so to say. And there's a 50% chance that when they use that skill, it is locked for the rest of the turn. So they may be able to get it off once, maybe they'll get it off once for certain, twice maybe, but every time afterwards becomes less and less likely. Everything else will just be insane. Now the question is, why would I put something like that in the game? That sounds mad unfair. And that's actually exactly why I'm putting it, because it is unfair. I want to put the player in situations where they can't just overpower the enemy. They should have to think and strategize and get themselves out of unfavorable situations. And they'll have the tools to do so as well. So it's not just entirely one-sided. Well, don't worry, there will be broken skills, and they will reward you for making good use of them. It's just that you're not going to have a push X to win button. You're not gonna have a push to win button, you know? That's what it is. Like you want your moment, you have to work for it. You have to have that setup. That's the idea anyway. Ah, fighting games, eh? I have a lot of friends that play fighting games. I mostly don't have the time for them. Otherwise, I might give them a shot. Like Tekken 8 looks incredible. Way back at the PS1, Tekken was basically my first real fighting game. Not my first video game per se, but like the first fighting game. I still sometimes think back to Tag Tournament on the PS2. That stuff was crazy. There was a really, really old puzzle game that I used to play. The way me and other kids discovered it was via the library, like a public library. I think we were going there like for the first time in school, and and it was like a game about a ball, and you're leading this ball like through an obstacle course in the sky, solving all manner of different puzzles and everything. And one of the main mechanics of the game was how you could change your ball into different materials. So like the default ball was made out of wood, but you could also change it into by going out over certain platforms, you could change it into a paper ball or into a stone ball. And a lot of the a lot of the puzzles had to do with momentum, with control, with the weight of your material, the way the material interacted with the environment. Like the paper ball, for example, it had a very, very uneven surface. So you didn't have a lot of control over it, especially at high speed. You didn't have it couldn't quite move calmly narrow narrow passages. It was a really cool game. It was a really cool game. So I would say the last level was a bit long. And what we did back then is anytime we went to the public library, we immediately went to the PCs and we started to play that. It's been a bit of a while since I've been streaming at all. I can already feel I'm starting to run a bit dry. But aside from the absolute boomer moment at the start, it was fun. I'll definitely see for next time to get to get OBS running in a way that it doesn't eat so many resources. Like that's definitely something I'm gonna do. We're not entirely done yet, but almost, yeah. Uh, like for the next week, I'll definitely see to get OBS running that it eats less resources, so that working and everything runs way smoother than it does now. Also getting everything working a bit better. Like the chat's a bit iffy right now. Probably have to change a couple things in the CSS. Blah blah blah, ta ta blah blah blah. And we'll be sketching something with a little bit more of a plan than tonight. It was a bit all over the place. It was fun, but all over the place. So next week or top next week, I gotta see. Like I try to have it all ready next week is next weekend again, and then it's gonna be a bit more of a planned stream. Is everyone gone already? Let me check briefly. Again, absolute goddamn boomer runs the stream tonight. So anyway, one thing that I want to mention before I shut down. I was going to post that on the uh, on the update, on the weekly update, and that is that I'm going to extend the promotion for 2 more weeks. I see if I can change that on Patreon as well, but that's neither here nor there, at least now. If I can't do that, then I'll just start another one for 2 more weeks, and that's gonna be that. So next week the stream is also going to be public. Might make might make streams public in general, frankly. Gotta see, gotta check. Probably. But for now, thank you for coming. Sorry for the massive hiccup. Absolute VTuber moment. And I'll be seeing you next time. So take care.